Okay, good morning again. So we're going to move on to our second panel. And the title for this panel presentation is Peace and Conflict Resolution. And the chair of the panel is Professor Krista Johnson, the director of the Center for African Studies, one of the co-sponsors of this conference. So when Dr. Johnson is ready, I'm going to invite her to the podium to introduce her co-panelists.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Dr.
very much.
Kamara.
Yes.
Well, welcome, colleagues. This is our second panel for this illustrious conference in honor and to celebrate our colleague, Professor Paul Zeleza. This panel, as Professor Kamara said, is titled Peace and Conflict Resolution. And we have 5 presenters for us today. I hope they are all here. And I'll just go in order of which is on our schedule. So our first presenter will be Mwema Wambua, who is with the USIU, the United States International University. And he is online, so we will hear his presentation virtually. Maybe. Have we been? Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just being informed that I think Mwema's not going to be able to join us today. So let's move to our presenter. Let's see, our other presenters are going to be here in person. So let's invite then to the stage Krista Cunningham with Howard University, who will give a presentation titled For the Ones Who Are Left, a Traumatized Systems Theory Perspective of Dr. Paul Zeleza's scholarship on African conflict. Is she here? Oh dear. Okay. Well, who did I see? Let's see. And are we too early this time? Okay, let's see who we have. Is Talitha Tukura-Pam here? Yes? Okay. Perhaps we can invite you to come and kick us off. So Talitha's presentation or paper is titled Struggles Across Borders, the Influence of Insecurity and Conflict on Diasporic Identity. To sit, okay. And then, yes. Okay. May I ask then my colleague, Professor Alam Hailu, to just come in? Sure. Let's take a seat on the well, not the podium. And also, Ekanade, Israel, is also here. No? Is Ekanade Israel here? Oh, okay, okay, fine, okay. Well, let me invite then Talitha Tukura-Pam to please come to the podium and give us your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. I'm very honored to be here. My name is Talitha. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Michigan. My title has changed. It's no longer whatever it was. Yes, it still struggles across borders, but it's now Northern Nigerian diasporas and the uneven geographies of belonging. And since I'm in the throes of dissertation writing, it's still very likely to change again. I did have a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to use it because it just seemed very complicated. And then lastly, I want to say happy birthday to Prof. Presenting here is a very, let me just say, coming across your work, especially your paper, what was the paper? Reconceptualizing the African diaspora. It was a very short paper, five pages in transforming anthropology. It reminded me that, something I like about your work is that it's very fluff-free. You write very straight to the point. And as a writer myself, it reminds us that, our writing should not be dense, but it should be something that whether you're in the academic space or not, it should be something that everybody can read. So let me get straight into it. So my dissertation examines Northern Nigerian migrants in the diaspora, with this paper specifically exploring the formation and performance of Northern Nigerian diasporic identity. In my research, I find that shared diasporic consciousness promotes a collective Northern Nigerian identity that seeks to transcend ethnic and religious divisions and mobilizes solidarity against systemic injustice in the public personal space, where unity is often emphasized. However, in private personal spaces, ethnic, religious, and regional affiliations frequently resurface, revealing the layered and sometimes contradictory nature of diasporic life. I define the public personal space as a performative space where individuals articulate communal identity and memory in public-facing ways that often have communal or political stakes, while the private personal space is the intimate and emotional domain of reflection where personal meaning is held. These divisions, rooted in historical mistrust, regional marginalization, and political rivalry, complicate efforts to build sustained unity within the diaspora, highlighting the fragile balance between collective resistance and intergroup fragmentation. This paper proposes a new analytical framework by distinguishing between public personal and private personal spaces. While theorists such as Jürgen Habermas and Nancy Fraser have examined the public versus private divide, their analysis primarily conceptualized these domains in structural or institutional terms. In contrast, this paper reframes the divide through an experiential and affective lens, emphasizing how identity, memory, and emotions are navigated and performed in distinct public-facing and intimate contexts. This diaspora-specific framework reveals how collective identity is both forged and fractured in everyday lives of migrants, shaped by competing demands of visibility, belonging, and historical difference. Now, the fieldwork for this research is conducted in Chicago, known for its cultural diversity and Nigerian population. I also conducted some archival research at the Missionary Archives at Wheaton College in Chicago. I speak Hausa and Baju. I'm from Kaduna State in Nigeria, and I found myself blending into these spaces quite naturally. So to illustrate my point, I will give both an anthropological or contemporary example and a historical example. So I grew up in Jos and Kaduna State. If I had a map with my PowerPoint, I would show you, but just use your imagination. And in the diaspora, I've encountered countless microaggressions tied to my identity. Other Nigerians in Nigeria and in the diaspora would often ask me where I was from. And when I replied Nigeria, the follow-up was almost immediate. But you don't sound Nigeria. What part of Nigeria are you from? When I replied, the response was often, oh, so you're a Hausa girl, followed by a range of comments that revealed deep-seated stereotypes, sometimes ignorant, sometimes open derogatory. People would say, I didn't know Northerners went to school, or I didn't know Northerners could speak English. When did Northerners start traveling? Or what are you doing here? What I thought were isolated experiences became repeated encounters during fieldwork when interlocutors reported similarly. These comments reflect assumptions about Northern Nigerians shaped by colonial legacies, regional politics, and media representations. Language, accents, and regional origins become proxies for education, cosmopolitanism, and legitimacy. To sound or appear Northern is for many to be read as rural, uneducated, or out of place by many other Nigerian diaspora groups, mainly the Yoruba and Igbo migrants whose identities are more commonly linked with success abroad. This contrast affords them greater symbolic capital and easier access to professional networks. Musa, a Northern Nigerian graduate student, recalls a conversation in which a fellow Nigerian student who insisted that most boys from the North were funneled into Almajiranchi, that is Quranic school associated with street begging. When Musa challenged this, another West African student noted that Northerners had never undergone that system and had attained leadership positions even outside Hausa-led administrations. This student later admitted that his views were shaped by media narratives. Similarly, several interlocutors shared how, despite introducing themselves by names in corporate settings, they were consistently addressed by reductive terms like aboki, yaro, or yarinya. While these words directly translate to friend, boy, and girl, they often carry condescending undertones when used to flatten identity and diminish status. These stories are echoed across gender dimensions as well. Amina, for example, regularly fielded questions like, do you have a husband? Or how come a Hausa Fulani girl like you is alone in America? Her identity was read through patriarchal and religious expectations. Meanwhile, Peter, an executive in a tech company, described the surprise on his colleagues' face when they learned of his Northern Nigerian background and accomplishments as though the two were incompatible. Jerry, too, recalled a heartfelt conversation with his Nigerian boss, who seemingly moved, asked, are you sure you're from Kaduna? This question, intended as a compliment, revealed disbelief that somebody from the North could embody warmth, intelligence, and sociability. Colonialism framed the North as uneducated and its people as inferior, and this framing still influences who is seen as educated, modern, or legitimate in transnational spaces. In the diaspora, to be Northern and Nigerian often transcends education, religion, ethnicity, and class, collapsing diverse identities into single marginalized categories. Far from home, in the public personal space, shared language, references, and regional origin can foster a sense of solidarity. Yet, in private personal spaces, regional and ethnic affiliations frequently resurface, revealing the layered and sometimes contradictory nature of diasporic life. This challenges the idea of ethnic homophily and reminds us, as Stuart Hall argues, that identification is not based on any essential sameness, but is constructed through shared histories or characteristics. I see this tension every month when I attend the Baju Development Association meeting online. After we discuss projects and members' concern, someone asks, why are we speaking English and Hausa and not Baju? Their frustration reflects more than language preference. It is tied to cultural preservation, power, and memory. Hausa, promoted as a lingua franca during colonial rule, often becomes the default in diaspora. Yet, for some, it feels like a concession to colonial erasure of minority language. This imagined unity often phrased within Nigeria, where eternal hierarchies complicate Northern identity. This historical case of Yakubu Yamrat, which I'll discuss next, illustrates these tensions. So in 1956, Yakubu Yamrat, a Christian leader in the northern central town of Bauchi, wrote a letter requesting land to build a church for his congregation. It was not his first appeal. A prior request on September 19, 1955 had been denied within 2 days. This time, The response from the local minister of the northern region was blunt. Christians seeking a place of worship in town should, quote, look outside, end quote. The land offered was on the outskirts, isolated and far from the community. Yamrat replied firmly, quote, we are not aliens, we are people of this town, end quote. Pointing to the central mosque, he questioned why Christians were denied the same access to communal space. His letter was more than a land request, it was a claim to belonging. Yamrat's letter resurfaced in correspondence between two Christian missionaries, Reverend Canon Foster and C.H.C. Edwards. On January 16, 1956, Edwards, a mission secretary, expressed concern that denying church sites in Muslim-populated town was a violation of religious freedoms. Rather than directly confronting authorities, he recommended a strategic awareness campaign. The Christian Council of Nigeria, already resisting laws separating education from religion, took up religious freedom as a political issue. At a general church assembly, figures like the chief of Kogoro and Malam Dauda Haruna backed the incorporation of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into Nigeria's draft constitution to safeguard minority religious rights. However, religious freedom was entangled with Nigeria's broader political struggles. The Northern People's Council, led by Hausa Fulani Muslims, depended on the Middle Belt's diverse population to secure power. In response, the United Middle Belt Congress advocated for largely Christian ethnic minorities demanding for political recognition. A proposed compromise saw the UNBC drop its demand for regional autonomy in exchange for religious protections. But could religious freedoms be negotiated away for political inclusions? This struggle was not merely about religion. It was about the long shadow of colonialism. Under British indirect rule, the Hausa Fulani elite were elevated while non-Muslim communities were relegated to the margin. As Moses Ochunu described, caliphate-centered colonialism, British administrators reinforced the Sokoto Caliphate's dominance, embedding Hausa Fulani Muslim leadership as the default for northern Nigeria. In 1903, Sir Frederick Lugard, Governor General of the Northern Protectorate, said, there will be no interference with your religion, nor with the position of the second Musulmi as the head of your religion. The English government never interferes with religion, taxes, laws, and order, punishment of crime. These are matters for the government, but not religion. End quote. That was an exact quote. Although vague, successive Nigerian governments enforced a de facto ban on Christian missionaries, enforcing mission activity among Hausa and Fulani Muslims, effectively closing Hausa land and reinforcing religious segregations. By the 1940s, missionary efforts in the Middle Belt, north-central Nigeria, had produced a politically active Christian elite who were critical of Hausa Fulani dominance. Yamrat's letters became acts of resistance, challenging a system that denied non-Muslim political and social legitimacy. Colonialism not only divided by religion, it racialized these divisions, privileging Hausa Fulani as noble Mohammedans while branching others as pagans or uncivilized. These hierarchies persisted into post-colonial era, shaping governance and intercommunal dynamics. In the diaspora today, northern Nigerian Christians, like their Muslim counterparts, often find themselves marginalized, while Nigerian immigrant communities, dominated by southern or eastern voices, much like Yamrat's struggle in Bauchi, contemporary northern Nigerians continue to push for recognition, equity, and representations. Yamrat's defiant words, "We are not aliens, we are people of this town," echo beyond their movement. Together, both illustrations speak to a broader, ongoing fight against exclusion rooted in histories of race, religion, and resistance. So finally, I want to just pull out two major points from these two illustrations. The first is how people perform, especially people of northern Nigeria, perform trust, honesty, and truth. So as scholars such as Cohen, Lovejoy, Mesolox, and last have shown, northern Nigerian communities, particularly the Hausa, draw on ethnic solidarity, religious identity, and cultural institutions to build trust, exert political influence, and sustain work and economic networks across a variety of social and geographical contexts. My lived experience and research findings affirm aspects of this scholarship while extending it to include other northern ethnic minorities. Several interlocutors describe how displaying certain cultural markers, such as language, dress, or social mannerisms like humility, respect, and shyness in the public personal space often lead to favorable treatment from individuals with whom they share regional origins, ethnicity, or ethno-linguistic ties. So this, I think, even cuts across not just Nigeria, but when you meet someone from your region, there's that, hey, hey, Niger, or hey, my sister from South Africa, or whatever. Yet, as seen in the private personal space, such performances do not always guarantee belonging. For example, the Baju leaders protesting, so diasporians express frustration that even when they actively participate in community life, attending events, contributing to funeral funds, and upholding shared norms of mutual support, their inclusion is often remains conditional. While trust in the public personal space is frequently granted based on visible cultural alignment, trust in the private personal space must be gradually earned. Here it is shaped by ethnic difference and nurtured through active participation in moral economies grounded in peaceful coexistence, which we call zaman lafiya, and working together, aikin tare. These values are often encapsulated in concepts like truthfulness, gaskiya, and honesty, aminci, which serve together as criteria for social inclusion. And then the second one, which is something that is closer to me, is how language power leads to the construction of social realities. So language is central to the production of power and the construction of social realities, particularly in shaping how northern Nigerians are perceived and positioned in both national and diasporic contexts. So phrases like, do northerners even go to school, or you don't sound Nigerian, are not just microaggressions. They are performative utterances that inscribe difference, inferiority, and unbelonging, and can make the subject of such utterances deal with inferiority complex and even imposter syndrome. So interlocutors like Yamrat and Amina challenge these discursive regimes by asserting belonging and resisting epistemic erasure. These speech acts, letters, retorts, and everyday assertions of identity, they reclaim authority over their narratives. As these examples show, language not only reflects power, but constitutes it, reinforcing or contesting who is seen as modern, legitimate, or worthy of rights within layered systems of governance, system, and representation. Thank you very much.
I'm going to, I think, call our second panelist. I think some of our presenters are not here, but I'm going to then call our second presenter, Professor Alam Hailu, who's in our Department of African Studies here at Howard University. And he's going to give his presentation on geopolitical realignment, human security, and sociopolitical change in a volatile world, responses to the threats of war, conflict, and climate change in the African world. So the floor is yours, Dr. Hailu.
Good afternoon, I guess, an afternoon now. Before I go into my paper presentation, I would like to say a few words on some of the thoughts that were expressed this morning, which is on the significance of the event. And I was thinking the ideas expressed where Dr. Kamara started, and I think the president of the university also pointed this out by showing how it's important to see the connections between the collective and the part. And the thing that strikes me and I find very, very important is how sometimes we dichotomize the two. And I remember when I was a youngster in undergraduate school, learning the Greek dialectics, and one of the definitions they had was where it's the two polar opposites exchanging and meeting with their ideas, with their efforts. I see events like this follow this pattern where, as Dr. Kamara was saying, the village raised the child, but the child also raised the village. So when we honor Dr. Zeleza, we're honoring ourselves. We honor the institution, we honor the culture. I remember when I was young, our parents, of course, our generation forgot all that, but they have these two languages, as my predecessor pointed out. The language they used to refer to each other was, you don't have that in English, in French, thou, in an honored way. And not only the elders, not only the grown-ups, but even the young ones referred to each other as thou, like my mother. When they were little kids, they would address each other. I find this important because we lose the significance of honoring ourselves, honoring our traditions. And this, to me, in fact, I get amused by one of the South African comedians. He has this stunt on TikTok where he goes to India and tells the Indian, "Who are you?" And the guy says, "I'm from Great Britain." "You call yourself great? Who said Great Britain?" "The Queen of England has called us great." So without even showing anything, others telling you, "Call yourself great?" "Yes, I'm from Great Britain." And the guy said, "Welcome, I'm from Great India." So we have this need, but sometimes we're discouraged from saying it. In fact, one of these social movements, those younger ones who get involved in social media, find out when we're growing up, you don't say anything good about yourself. That's bragging. That's wrong. And you don't say that about people you love also. That's showing off. But this social media say, tell yourself you're great. Look at the mirror. Call yourself, "I love you. You're wonderful." And when I was younger, in a way it can be simplified, but the larger meaning of it is, it's okay to appreciate your culture. It's okay to appreciate the individual, you, the community, and I see some of my students in the class. We always talked about how, as mentioned earlier, culture is central to the well-being of societies. And when the Harlem Renaissance started, one of the things that I really was struck by and impressed me was how they wanted to build the spirit of the African, both the African American, the North African, but global African as a global thing. And Langston Hughes writes this line where he said, we write about ourselves, and we are beautiful. If whites agree with us, we'll be happy. If not, it's okay. We know who we are. We know who we are, you know. So I say this by way of showing my tribute and my appreciation for the occasion we have to say, good job, you know. And that's an example for the young people, even for the older ones, you know, who get inspired by the good that the individual does. That's inspired that the collective benefits from it, and the individuals aspire to do that. Now, to go to my paper, by the way, I'll mention to you how I had wanted to change it later on, but for now, it looks at the issues of realignment, how the world has changed, and how I need to have this, yeah, how human security and geopolitics affect the world events, affect the well-being of the whole world, but in our case, Africa and the African world. And I try I guess I have to tell the people in charge of the thing. If you could, go to the next slide. Geopolitics. It looks at geopolitics as a concept, as a mode of understanding, as a tool, and also as a process in which politics, economy, history are played in the global stage, and how this is reflected in policies, in institutions, in cultures. With that comes security, where traditionally security has been defined as a state that is only of concern to the government, how many tanks would have, the army, the military. So security meant military security. Later on, we find out the United Nations Development, UNDP project, and scholars pointed out that this is only a partial aspect of security. If you want human security, the other components have to come with it. It has to encompass physical security, economic security, social security, the environment, the culture, the human dignity. All these are what should be involved. And the next slide, the shifts we see now, the change in the world, are reflected by how security is redefined and influenced by all the huge changes that are going on in the world, in the economy, in politics, in the relations nations and non-state actors have had now in the world. And with it has come a major case of climate change, where in the past it was a given, and now it's accepted as the key element of human survival, human security, where without the conditions, the environmental conditions that made life possible, preserving them is as important. And the players are changing, and some of the change in discourse is more like a lip service, but at least the forces of the world are coming together, showing how respect for the environment, respect for climate, for weather is key. When I first came to this country years ago, we always thought America had conquered security. When we were told cyclones were under control, floods. Now you see all the turbulences that were characteristic of the third world happening here because of the global change. And the models of security, where if you build the economy, everything will flow. But now, the African conception, the African paradigm of looking at nature, at the trees, at the rivers, the mountains, how that's not a primitive way of looking at non-living things, in quotation marks, as living things, but we as part of it collectively are the human beings. What has now come to be known as the geo theory, is the theory of the Mother Earth as key to our survival. And the players are changing now. China, Russia, Turkey, the Gulf states are having impact on the economic policies, the economic conditions in Africa, but also the other parts. So you see, if you next slide, please. I'm talking to I call them the NASA project, running our thing from the back. You know, I'm used to pressing the button, but next slide, please. Yeah, next one. I forgot I had to tell them. Yeah, this is the map that shows the forces that impinge on Africa. You see the whole flags of the world. The next slide also, please. And this is how all these things come together in terms of the changes in the continent: drought, water scarcity, floods, internal conflicts that are part of the disruptions in the continent, military occupation, what is called local swarms, but what they say when human beings have, like with COVID, one of the curses of modernization has been moving into the forests that were considered holy by pre-modern traditions, defiling them, only seeing them as timber products for tables and for shelves, or as byproducts of industries, how they should be viewed, and how these disruptions are fueling the emergence of disease. COVID is one. Other diseases are coming also. Next slide. Along this, we have, next slide, please. Yeah, this is a quick mental picture I want you to see on the trafficking routes, where flows to Africa in income, in trade, investment, are also associated with trafficking routes, illegal trafficking of drugs, arms, all kinds of trafficking, human trafficking, and this is global. Whereas in the past, Africa was considered marginal, which I always say that's only in the minds of the colonial powers, that Africa being marginal, but that it is central to the world. That has been at the forefront of global transformations. I mention this in my class all the time, where this quote I cherish from Karl Marx, when he saw the Industrial Revolution, the rise and progress and development of the West was at the foundation, at roots, the base of what people of African descent had done, Africans in the world, both in the continent and in the diaspora, where he said, you've seen, many of you who have taken development, the early development theories emphasized textiles as the base of investment. The Manchester textiles, all this were the very basis of the industrial rise of Great Britain, and that was repeated by the Asian countries. But Karl Marx pointed out it's the capital, what he called primitive capital, that financed, that fueled the industrial development. He showed how sugar and cotton and all this was the basis. And he pointed out cotton was the base of the industrial rise. He said, no black skin, no industrial revolution. So that's how Central Africa has been, and the African world has been to the rise. But it's like somebody, the worst thing people do is they take your money, you lend them money, you give them things, and at least you would expect them to say thank you or say, oh, he's nice. But a lot of times, sometimes they say, oh, he's foolish or he's weak, So for all that, the grading it got was, it's still primitive, it's still peripheral. Even many leaders openly say, Africa has no significance, has no strategic significance for the world, boldly, even now. And next slide, please. So here it says the correlates of security and insecurity. The correlates of security is where the advanced health system, advanced educational system, industrial system is correlated with what was going on in Africa and the African world. The insecurity is the down part of that, the downside of the dark side of that, where the other illegal ways, legally defined policies have also had wrong effects on the continent. Next slide. So you see the effects of the conflict, the effects of the. I have tons of statistics. I don't think I would have time to relate to you, but the arms flows to the continent, the flow of now ideologies that of conflict, of polarization, how they have affected the continent, is where you have huge population displacement. You have from 5 million in the 1980s to 18 million in 2017. Now, Sudan alone, they were talking about 10 million people. You have displacements in the Congo, in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, all these spots. Next slide, please. So you see the mining, the illegal mining. That's part of this process, where this picture could be in the Congo, any parts of Africa where gold mining is this really rich source of wealth. In 2022, over 30 billion worth of gold was smuggled. This is illegal, illegally smuggled, for 30 billion, mind you. And between 2012 to 2022, 115 billion worth of gold products were moved out with no detection. This is the non-announced part. And Africa losing 88.6 billion annually due to capital flight. This is flights from different members of the community. There are the 100 rare earth elements, mineral deposits, sites found in half of the African countries, but armed conflicts take 18 billion per year out of the arms that come in, and the benefits from there. And the total cost of armed conflict in Africa, around 300 billion since 1990. This is the cost. This sum is equivalent to all international aid from all the major countries in the world. So you see the exploitation of the resources, what you see, the mines. This is only the gold. Congo has something like 50% of the world's cobalt, and 2/3 of the production is from the Congo. They have, you name it, all the key resources, and not only in the Congo, cobalt and uranium and many of the rare products that fuel the so-called new industrial revolution with laptops, with electronics. Copper, 50% of the world's copper is just in the Congo, and they say the world would come to a stop if Congo stopped this sale. So let's quickly go over the. Oh, I'm okay. Please slides. Let me run the slides, and then I'll try to put together. Could we have another new slide? Slide, please. Okay. This is the setting. The policies, how there is how new players have come into slides, please. Keep going as I go. I'll say slides. And with the climate change, how it has significant impact on the most on the next one, please. Continued. Slide. Oh. Can you keep going, please? Slide. This is the arms. More. Slide. Another one. Another slide. I'm running because I'm being told I do manage my time. Keep just run the slides, could you? Yes. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. Hold on. Go on. Keep going. Go. Okay. Stop right there. This is where the paper comes together, where 2 points, I'll use this as a way of concluding. The 2 points is we look at these issues, what they call this, the structural, from the structural point of view, the systemic point of view, where the changes in the economy, the alignments in the world, the shifts in BRICS, and all that are realigning, how the new policy in the US is redefining the global order. And Dr. Zeleza says this in the two ways that they have. One is in the realm of ideas. When we used to worship Marxism, I was shocked to find out when I started downloading it how Václav Havel, the first president of Czechoslovakia, he pointed out how ideas were the primary, according to Marx economics. So now we know ideas matter, if not more, just equally. So on the realm of institutions, there is this quote I want to read: Africa has emerged, according to Zeleza, as a significant player in world affairs, exerting increasing influence on economic, political, and strategic realignments, with vast reserves of critical minerals, rapidly expanding markets, and growing diplomatic leverage. The continent is positioning itself as a central pillar of the 21st century global economy. At the center of the three shifts in Africa itself, an increasingly assertive player shaping global partnership on its own terms. The continent is leveraging global competition to secure more favorable trade agreements, industrial investments, and technological advancements. This shift is not merely about the external alliance, but represents a broader definition of Africa's place in a global order. So this twin approach, one is in the realm of ideas and policies. The second one is on the realm of culture, what the spirit, the Pan-African idea, when Nkrumah got his idea from the African diaspora of uniting Africa. That is key to lifting the spirit, to strengthening the consciousness, the culture of Africa. That's an important component. And the second part is the structural component. And that's why I'm glad to be part of this occasion, to have us reflect on the ideas and respect him pay our respect as a person, and also indirectly praise ourselves, praise the African village, praise the African institutions, and show the connections of the African world, as mentioned earlier, the Africans in Africa, the Africans in India, in North America, and Latin America. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor Hailu. We're going to have one final presenter who I believe is on Zoom now, Ekenade Israel, who is going to be presenting a paper titled Mandela's One 5-Year Term, a Lesson for Africa's Sit-Tight Leaders in Zeleza's Perspective. Do we have Ekenade online?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, we can. Online. Yes, and we can hear you. So, Ekenade, the floor is yours. And if you could please keep your presentation to 15 minutes, then we can ask for a little bit of Q&A.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. Good day, colleagues. Happy 70th birthday, Professor Zeleza. I wish you all the best in life. Yes, let's roll. Mandela's 1-year, 5-term, a lesson for Africa's sit-tight leaders. Let me start by saying Africa is a continent blessed with lots of resources, be it mineral, human, capital, and the likes. Well, the commodification of Africa that many people would call the scramble for Africa culminated into the partitioning of borders, the introduction of colonial rule into Africa. Yes, Africa could be classified by the colonialists into 3, should I say, broad regions: Francophone, Lusophone, and Anglophone. But after the era of colonization, we had many countries, or many African states between the 50s and the 60s gaining independence. It's noteworthy to note that the likes of W.B. Du Bois, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, and some other African nationalists, both in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and in Africa, used all they had to put an end to apartheid rule. Africa was being exploited because the West came, sourced for resources, took it back to the West, and brought it back to Africa as finished goods. The Cold War era was just characterized by, ideological differences, basically between Russia-led USSR, and America. This sudden bipolar arrangement meant that they had proxies who fought wars on their behalf. Also, Africans have subjected democracy as an ideology to proper scrutiny. And many have often voiced out that the only problem bedeviling Africa is the crisis of leadership. There was democracy, later we now had military regimes. So the shift or the movement from democracy to military and back to democracy, or an undulating plane, has unsettled many African states. Of course, the likes of Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, Paul Kagame, they apparently they displaced sit-tight governments or military governments. They displaced them. However, they took charge and now became despots in their own territories. Initially, they came as freedom fighters, but now they have become oppressive rulers. The objectives of our study are just four. We intend locating the pointers to sit-tight syndrome in Africa. We want to assess the incidence of authoritarian regimes in Africa. We intend studying how African states have coped under perennial dictators and dictatorship. And we also want to examine the implications of a few decent democratic leaders like Nelson Mandela and Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. Our study is important because it explores why dictators run some African states. It's also significant because the sit-tight syndrome varies from state to state. Also, the resurgence of coup in Africa, or what Mama Dr. Chikombori Akwao, what she calls the coup pandemic in Africa. We want to look at why are we having a resurgence, and especially in West Africa. These they've assumed frightening dimensions in our contemporary times. As a result, it has made our study an important academic undertaking. Yeah, the likes of Schumpeter and Robert Dahl argue that a vital role is being played by leaders in democracies, and that the immaterial role played by them was to define democracy. Schumpeter avers that to understand a democratic organization, the process of power acquisition and decision-making is vital. However, a basic characteristic feature that separates African democracy from the contemporary democracy is the sincerity of citizens' opinion that happen to be vulnerable to the bias of their leaders. That's why you see when citizens come out to voice their displeasure, you see these sit-tight leaders using state apparatus, using state apparatus, or using state security agents to torment harmless citizens. I just go to a brief review of literature. As we speak, academia is caught in the web of increased suspicion or the divide between general public and the government. So we don't even know where academia belongs to. Are we on the side of the public or the masses, or are we on the side of the government? So this has been responsible for a sudden disappearance of civic engagement in African democracies. And from time to time, discontentment and disapproval continues to grow on the African continent. And for example, we've had sit-tight leaders in Nigeria who were khaki boys. I call them khaki boys, those in military uniform or camouflage. We call them khaki boys in Nigeria. There was a time we had president, a military president, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. He kept on, postponing, his departure from office. Later on, there was an interim national government in Nigeria led by the late Ernest Shonekan. After 3 months, there was a palace coup, and that interim government was toppled. Then came General Sani Abacha, and the man held the whole nation spellbound until he was eased out, I don't know, by God or a supreme being, and we now had the Fourth Republic, which happens to be the reinstatement of democracy in Africa. You go to places like Zimbabwe, the likes of Robert Mugabe. These people even plan to install their own children as henchmen whilst still alive. Of course, in Africa, people still favor democracy as the best form of government, but it will not stop Africans from showing their displeasure or disdain at the way government is being run on a daily basis. The sit-tight syndrome, that is a basic feature of some African leaders, has actually pulled Africa and Africans backwards. As a result, many African states are still under the siege of dictators who don the garb of democracy. Our theoretical framework is authoritarianism. Bedesky, 1981, sees authoritarianism as an ideology conceived or arrived at through history and is generated as a means of intervention in the wake of political disorder. A major feature of authoritarianism is elitist dictatorship, including becoming a cult figure. Mugabe was more or less a cult figure. Muammar Gaddafi was more or less a cult figure. Many African despots, they were cult figures, and you dare not say anything against the government of the day. In a place like Libya, anyone who says anything against the government, in those days, my friend's father was actually telling me, a Ghanaian who worked in Libya, they were brought out in the public, and the state television would televise their open execution so that it will serve as a deterrent to others and to create fears. And you see, this issue of authoritarianism or sit-tight syndrome in Africa led to the Arab Spring that spread through parts of North Africa, and it even moved to some other parts of the Middle East. So in an authoritarian regime, the power of authority is vested in one person or just a limited group of people. Here in Nigeria, in fact, a legislator once called it cabalocracy, a government of the cabal, by the cabals, and for the cabals. And we still see this turning out in many African states. When you go to a place like Gabon, it was the Bongo dynasty that was just toppled recently, and the cousin who became the military president has now been reinstated as a civilian president. These people can even go to any length. They would change the constitution, they would rape the constitution, they would violate the constitution just to remain in power. When you go to a place like Uganda, Yoweri Museveni now claims that he doesn't know his age. And Catholic bishops came out to support his candidature. Well, I don't know what to say about Africa. Let me move on to Mandela. This man is a leader to learn from. He only occupied the seat for a 1 year, 5 term, and he left the stage. The ovation was not even loud. He left the stage immediately. But when you look at Kwame Nkrumah, he was toppled in a coup. Jomo Kenyatta and Hifikepunye of Ivory Coast, they died in active service. So the two persons that had the same sterling qualities like Mandela's were Mwalimu Julius Nyerere of Tanzania and Senghor of Senegal. However, that of Mandela was just amazing. Mandela was an amazing human being. He was an amazing leader. Methodology, we used qualitative methods, which was just basically a desktop approach. We got secondary data from journal articles, books, conference proceedings, and we also adopted a historical descriptive explanation. Let me just go to the discussion and I conclude. African states are being overshadowed by despots. These have delirious consequences on Africa and Africans. The wave of coups in West Africa, is alarming, especially West Africa, as other khaki boys, other military men across the continent might decide to take over governments in many African states. We have seen Niger, we've seen Burkina Faso, Niger, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali. Afterwards, Gabon, there was also a coup in Gabon. So we don't know which country is next. Authoritarian regimes have become emboldened as they carry out violations with impunity. As a result, some Africans even celebrate this class of shenanigans without confronting them. They are hardly held accountable by the electorate. The civil society space has also been threatened and their voices stifled by these power usurpers. These sit-tight leaders also install their children whilst alive, giving them juicy appointments in respective cabinets. Is it not Equatorial Guinea? One of the president's son happens to be the Minister for Finance. He did not even make him a Minister for Local Government and Chieftaincy Affairs. They put these kids of theirs in juicy positions. I go further now to my conclusion. No doubt, Africa still lingers in the world of dirty politics, especially that of third feminism and sit-tight leadership syndrome. Yes, if I may add to this, some African constitutions state that after 2 terms, you cannot go for a 3rd term. A former Ivorian president tried going for a 3rd term. Former Nigerian president, Olusegun Obasanjo, tried changing the constitution to accommodate him for a 3rd term, but he failed. So we see that across the continent of Africa. When the 2-term tenure is almost complete, they try to bribe the Senate, the legislators, and they try to abuse or violate the constitution. Many leaders still hold their respective constitutions by the jugular. Some have changed constitutions, permitting them to become life presidents, while others have used unscrupulous means to retain power. The attendant consequences have not only birthed military coups and civil wars, it has also led to exacerbation of conflict and violence and to the mushrooming of terrorist groups aligned to Al-Qaeda and the likes. These violent non-state actors have come to occupy a strategic role in the African polity. Sit-tight syndromes in Africa has led to all of this. You also have agitations, self-determinations, secession groups, ethnic militia, and other violent groups. These groups have filled the void created by undemocratic practices by those who say they practice democracy. Thank you very much. This is my submission. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ekenade, for that presentation. I had failed to mention before as well, Ekenade is with Tshwane University of Technology in South Africa. So thank you very much for that. We have just a few minutes before we're going to break for lunch. So I wanted to open it up to the audience and see if, yes, and probably, sorry, and invite, yes, please, probably invite Talitha and Dr. Hailu up to the stage. And if we have one or two questions, I know we're in your way for eating, so that's never a good thing. But wanted to make sure we got in a couple of questions. Yes, please come to the mic, I think, yes, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. It's kind of an academic question, but it's really more than that as well. We criticize and we talk about anti-democratic things. We talk about authoritarianism, and we talk about totalitarianism. These things are all bad. We regard them in the abstract as being bad. But in terms of development, I have a question. My question is this: why is it that in the African context, unlike in some other places, authoritarianism has not led to the kind of technocratic development? For example, the U.S. always loves to talk about how bad Soviet totalitarian socialism or communism was. And we know the excesses, et cetera. But it was the Soviets who put a satellite in space first, a man in space first. Chinese have a space station now. 50 years ago, they were riding bicycles in Beijing. So I'm trying to understand mechanistically, what is it that's different? And while all of these people talk about authoritarianism and how terrible it is, they put their factories in China. And the reason they did it is because they knew the workers would line up and do the work. But Africans would line up and do the work too. So I don't want to answer my own suspicion, but I'm trying to understand, and I have the suspicion too that when the U.S. removes full embargo against Cuba, that all of a sudden a lot of industries in the southern United States will be offshoring to Cuba, communist Cuba. So I'd just like you to comment on why we think that authoritarianism in Africa has not led to the kinds of technocratic or technological, albeit in the context of undemocracy, but led to the technological developments that you see in other places.
Thank you. I'm gonna, yes, if you could come and offer your question as well. I'll take a couple questions and then I'll turn it to the panelists to respond.
Thank you. My question goes to my sister, Talitha, from, you say you're Fulani? Hausa, yeah, at least you're Nigerian. Yeah, my question is this. Have you ever looked at the importance of understanding history to reversing the subjugation and inferiorization of other tribes in those settings that you mentioned? For example, I found out that understanding history may change attitude from exceptionalism, condemnation to compassion. For example, when I first got to South Africa, what Nigerians say is, South Africans are lazy. South Africans cannot do business. South Africans depend on government. And I joined them to say that. And they too, they say, Nigerians are this, Nigerians are that. Until I studied apartheid and see why a South African will not ordinarily stand up and go and open a shop. Because his generation never did that before. The same thing in Nigeria. I see a northerner and I look at him as a fool. Yeah, he will never go to school. I never knew this story you said today until I did my PhD, because it was not taught in school. How colonialism cemented Islamic authority on the northern part and hindered the missionary and hindered education. When I understood that history, then my perspective changed from oppression to compassion. So within your local communities, especially in these northern areas, where the Muslim are subjugating other people because of the power given since colonial era, is there a way teaching? Have you ever studied the impact of understanding history on behavior, on attitude? How can we include history, true history of colonialism in curriculum? And finally, to Dr. Ekwade, all this woes, like, I wish his paper could talk about the solution. Why, like the last person who asked, why is it that this authoritarian government are rising, and what are the possible solutions? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to turn it to my panelists. Ekenada, are you still there with us online on Zoom?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. So you can hear us. We can't see you at the moment, but that's wonderful.
Sure.
Let me invite you to respond briefly, just in 2 minutes, to the questions that were asked, and then I'll get our panelists here.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Yes, well, we see that many African leaders, if not all, who have this authoritarian traits in their genes. I'm not sure if they were born with it from heaven. The central thing in their lives is greed. Dr. Adejumo that just asked me a question now, would thank God she's a Nigerian, then my big aunt there that is seated there is a Nigerian. The likes of Sani Abacha, his loot is still being sent to Nigeria from Europe and other parts of the world. How come a dead man, he died 1998 or so, he's still sending us money? Is a dead person is sending the living person, the living people money? I mean, it's totally greed. Then the African society or the Nigerian society does not have punitive measures against these people, or the African society. When you go to a place like China, it's communist, it's communism. You steal, you pay for it. You're being killed, you're summarily executed. Jerry Rawlings, the late Jerry Rawlings of Ghana, tried it, and Ghanaian sat up. Maybe that is brought back to the fore, but of course, civil society will shout, NGOs will shout, Amnesty International will shout, but at this stage, I would also want us to profile African solutions to African problems. Some will say, okay, I'm Christian, but some would even argue that if you become a president, don't use the Bible or the Quran to swear. Just give them one fetish thing or one native thing, and let them hold it. Should they violate that promise, then thunder or something will strike.
Oh, we're losing you, and that's maybe a good place to end.
Those are just my comments.
We're going to move on
Thank
to,
you.
I want to ask Professor Hailu and Talitha to respond as well.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. I know you're all getting tired, so I'll be brief. To the question about the relations between politics and development, I think he answered his own question. I don't know if you remember, but when China was trying to assert itself and came as a formidable power, there was an African summit in Beijing, and many of the African leaders asked the Chinese leaders, how could we imitate you? How could we follow your example? The answer they gave them was, don't follow us. Do it your way. Many of the things that we all learn from outsiders. Everybody learns from Europe, we learn from the world learns from each other. What is wrong is when you become blind imitators. The parliamentary system, the English parliament system was started, all the rituals were taken, failed in many countries. Communism was adopted in Ethiopia and Somalia and in Mozambique and all that has failed. And that shows that we don't do it in a living way. Take ideas and see how they developed. You mentioned the authoritarian regimes, Korea was an authoritarian regime. Even Japan, as you celebrated, the Japanese party was in power for almost 50 years. Well, almost a one-party state, but it had all the other elements. Indonesia, Taiwan, many of these authoritarian regimes, this is not to say, okay, well, let's imitate authoritarianism, but how that is done, how that is implemented is the key. And what comes from your question is, I remember seeing a cartoon, a woman was mad at her husband, and she said, you're 50% of my problem. And the other 50% is me, she said. 50%, maybe 60% of Africa's problems is the world. The other 40% is the elites who are not creative, who are not imaginative, who don't have what, like our participant said, they don't take the idea of authoritarianism wrongly. Singapore had an authoritarian leader, but at least he produced the economy. So there are other things that go with it, culture, decency, engagement. So these are things where that's why having occasions like this is important for scholars and public intellectuals looking at the problem in a large way. So I don't want to talk much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Talitha.
Thank you for your question. There's so many ways that I can answer it, but to keep my my train of thought in one place, I wrote down some notes. And I think the first thing is like just the way we teach history. I did not take any formal history course till I came to the U.S. And you know as well as I do that in Nigeria, we don't teach history for our secondary schools unless you reach SS1. And I think that that's one of the discredits we do to our Nigerian students, and because of that, very few of them take or do undergrad history, talk less of history on a undergrad or even master's level. And because of that, they don't learn African history. They don't even learn Nigerian history. So all these things that I'm talking about, they don't learn it. And because of that, they learn things that the colonizer wanted them to learn, and it tends to be skewed, which is a big problem. And there are many ways that you can teach history, very interesting and engaging things, but when you pile dates and you pile things that are unattractive and sound boring, nobody wants to do history, so that's one big problem. And then I'm thinking of even the Almajiri story that I told you, somebody saying that everybody in the North goes through Almajiri. There's those kind of stereotypes. Everybody in the North is veiled. A lot of those things are taught through media. And as well as I do, when you turn on the TV and you see those kind of things, everybody's veiled, all the women are in a room in the back, they don't come out. Those are the things that they just keep being perpetrated and on and on and on, and nobody changes, because those things, they sell. They seem exotic, they seem mystic, Nollywood just keeps, showing those kind of things, and people think that it's true because nobody is changing it, and media continues to perpetrate those kind of things, and it's a big problem. And it comes with unlearning for people that should know better, but they don't want to change those kind of things. So I think, and then lastly, there's the issue of NYSC. Even those that go to the north for NYSC, those of us that are from Nigeria, they go at a later stage when they're in, they've finished with university. I wish opportunities for people to have those kind of postgraduate or post-university opportunities came earlier, so that they could, now with the security situations in Nigeria, it's not, but I just wish those kind of those kind of regional opportunities came earlier, so that people could see what Nigeria, different regions of Nigeria had, or if there was an opportunity for people to experience Nigeria firsthand in one way or the other, safely, let me add safely, firsthand, it would be good so that they could experience for themselves. But it happens so late when they have already formed for themselves opinions that are hard to change. And then, they continue to go on and share those kind of stories, and then it's a problem. So we can talk more about it after, but I understand what you're saying about histories and,
Thank you.
May I ask her a question? Is it okay?
We, I think, are running out of time. Yes, I'm sorry. But we're breaking
we're
for lunch.
sitting next to
and I
each
was going to
other.
say, and the conversations can continue, right, as we go to lunch. Did you have some, I'm going to invite Dr. Kamara to come back up and maybe just tell us what's next on our agenda, or where we're going for lunch?
Yeah, we're going to have lunch until 2:10, and we'll come back at 2:10 and panel 3 will be presenting. And of course, the conversation continues over lunch and thank you.
Thank you.